Welcome. My name is Gina Denise Cooper Benjamin. I am the Deputy Director of NDIA, and I'm so happy to be moderating this panel today. We're going to have a fun, lively conversation. I'm going to start by letting the panelists introduce themselves and share a bright spot from their communities. Then if we have time, we will have time. I'm going to go through a moderated conversation, and then if we have time, we'll go through some Q&A. After the Q&A, we'll wrap it up. I'll tie it with a pretty little bow. And then, but before we get started, I want to establish some norms for all of us. So please try to be present. You can have your computers open, that's fine, but please try to be present. And in fact, I'm going to ask one of you to open your computer because we have collaborative note-taking. And in our session, there's a collaborative note-taking doc. If more than one of you want to go in there and start taking notes for the session, it's for people to use afterwards. We found it to be a really helpful tool. Respect each other and the panelists. Don't talk over each other. Give the panelists time to respond. Be kind, be productive, be asset focused. Enjoy our time together. Be solution oriented. No bad questions here. Always ask, have fun, mind the topic. So we're here to talk about the topic, marginalized communities. And then if you have questions, can you write them down until the Q&A, and then we'll get back to them during the Q&A session. And then, okay, I think that's it for right now. Okay. So before we get into it, I want to make sure that you're in the right place. Once again, marginalized communities conversation right now, bridging the digital divide in marginalized communities. So we're talking about this, we're approaching this topic for those who don't look like those we serve, and how to build trust within community members, what's at stake when our most vulnerable community members are digitally excluded, understanding the root causes of issues impacting marginalized communities, putting power in the hands of community members, and then where do we go from here? So we're going to wrap it up with some forward thinking. What does this look like? What does this look like in marginalized communities moving forward? Today, I'm joined by Davida Del Mar, Tribal Broadband Bootcamp from Tribal Broadband Bootcamp, representing, a lover of Dell's Lemonade from her time at Brown University and an expert bead artist. Peter Michelin, Hispanic Federation, and a proud first-generation American with a passion for helping immigrants and the children of immigrants thrive in the United States. Monica Escobar is sitting next to me, of the National Urban League and supporter of many causes, including civil rights and poverty alleviation. And then Angel Lin of Asian American Advancing Justice, AAJC, and a Seahawks superfan. I'm a Patriots fan, so this is going to be interesting. So to start, I'd like to invite each of you, and then we'll start with you, Monica, to introduce yourselves, your work in the context of digital inclusion. And then I'd love to have people, sorry, I have to speak into the mic. And then I'd love to have people start with one bright spot from their communities. So you have a few seconds to just introduce yourself.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Monica Escobar. I work with the National Urban League. I'm the Urban Tech and Jobs Program Manager at the National Urban League. And basically what we do is we have over 94 affiliates all over the nation. Each affiliate is in different cities. Each affiliate offers a variety of programs. Under Urban Tech and Digital Inclusion, we see it as a two-pronged approach. One, digital equity, and two, workforce. So we are developing programs and curriculum on both of those areas.
Thanks for having me. My name is Peter Michelin. I'm the Director for Workforce Initiatives at Hispanic Federation. We are a Latino-led and serving nonprofit with the mission of empowering Latino communities throughout the United States. We have 800 partner organizations that are independent nonprofits, and our program issue areas are economic empowerment, health, immigration, civic engagement, education, and health. We also have policy, so the policy and the programs go hand in hand. And as it relates to this work, we've really began in 2020 through our program called the Latino Digital Accelerator. I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, where we provide digital skills training and technical assistance to Latino-led and serving institutions.
Sorry, did you both do a bright spot from your communities? Was that your bright spot? Okay, I think I like bright spots from
That's
communities.
a great
So we're going to do that.
And I prepared a bright spot, and I
Okay.
forgot to mention it. I have two bright spots actually. So, Latino workers drove $4.1 trillion in economic activity in 2025, and Latinas launch businesses at a faster rate and more sustainably than any other demographic in the United States.
Thank you. Wait, Monica.
That's great work. The National Urban League, we are under the Urban Tech Jobs Program. We had our affiliates start tech academies. And so they're providing certification to cybersecurity. We subsidize that type of work, and we have been able to make great impact throughout the 21 cities that we have tech academies in.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Angel from Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. Our organization is a DC-based policy organization that seeks to empower the civil rights of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in the United States. And while I work primarily on policy work in AI and consumer privacy, we see broadband rights as fundamentally tied to civil rights. And therefore, we find that empowering our community members and community leaders to promote digital equity and giving them the resources, funding, and sub-grants to actually do so is a key pillar to the work that we're doing. A bright spot in our community is over the past year, we've been able to sub-grant $500,000 to our community partners for these digital equity grants, which has been really great. And after hosting listening sessions with these community partners who have hosted these digital equity grants, I think a bright spot I'd love to highlight is that our community practitioners are being very innovative and resourceful and responsive in their digital equity courses. A lot of them are teaching our community members how to use AI to write job applications and resumes. A lot of them are teaching them how to enforce digital security within their own personal lives in order to respond to the current moment and threats that we're facing under the administration. And I think that speaks to continued opportunities for funding and continued innovation in this space.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Davida Delmar. Biptoy Nishlek Ketachini Basashin, Ki Ani Dashedo, Torochini Dashanala. Those are my clans in my native language. I'm a citizen of the Navajo Nation. I'm visiting from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm very cold this week. And so, yeah, it's funny when I visit tribal communities, they always are giving me like coats and things like that because I'm always cold. And no one's giving me a coat this week. No. But no, I'm happy to be here. I am, yes, I work with Tribal Broadband Boot Camp, which is actually funded by the Waskawiwin. And I'm a board member for Waskawiwin, which is a brand new nonprofit created around the boot camps. And I work with the Institute of Local Self-Reliance as well, and as a consultant and currently also a consultant with Merit as well. So I'm just kind of proud because I love the work that we're doing with Project Compass in that realm. So I've been working with tribal communities in digital equity since 2022, which was with Ameren, which is a tribally owned company. They partnered with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, where I was able to, be part of the NDIA crew and staff. And so if you recognize me from last year, I was, wearing the t-shirts. But yeah, so grateful for my time there because I was able to do a lot of good in terms of building these programs of digital equity in tribal communities, which my first day at NDIA was basically, you're the expert in Indian country. And then my response was, what's digital equity? So that's the same for like when we go to these tribal communities, it's the same thing of like, what is this and why should I care about this? And why does it apply to our community? Why should we care about this? And so that was my job, is to kind of, create that, vision for communities, set digital equity terms in how Indigenous communities operate, and put representation in that space as well. And so we've created an Indigenous Digital Inclusion Working Group, which I'm very proud of, and has representation from not only like a lot of folks from the lower 48, but also Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and also our friends up in Canada. So as you can see, like Indigenous values are very similar, and we kind of relate to each other in that realm. And I think that's a bright spot right there, that we're breaking down silos, even though our culture is very specific to our region, to our land, to our people, to our teachings, to our language. Yet we all find commonalities within each other, and we find humor and familiarity, and like everyone is like either my auntie or my brother in the space too. So I'm very proud of that fact too. And another bright spot is that we have the 7-star communities as well, which is just another way to, highlight and share storytelling and resources from Indian country. So if you want to learn more about that, you should come to the reception later. So yes.
Thank you, Davida. So I wanted to say, Davida, actually, you set the tone perfectly for this conversation, because I have found that sometimes we go into marginalized communities, our own communities, and use the term digital equity. People are like, what is that? In reality, there's a lot of digital inclusion work happening in our communities, and people just don't call it that. And so I think that was a perfect way to set the tone. Angel, we're going to start with you. Okay. As a field, we talk a lot about infrastructure as a significant barrier to digital equity. We work and live in communities with other barriers facing our residents. I want to know, and I know that AAJC recently released some research. What did that research indicate are some other barriers to digital equity, especially as they relate to safety and trust in a digital world?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think that to first set the context for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders as a demographic, I think that oftentimes there are a lot of misconceptions that Asian Americans are very digitally connected. In reality, a lot of the research that has existed previously on the digital divide hasn't used disaggregated data and doesn't reveal the fact that, despite the fact that Asian Americans are the fastest growing and most diverse demographic group in the United States, a third of them are actually limited English proficient. Half of them are foreign born, and 1/7 of them actually struggle with internet access. We represent 70 countries and far more languages. And therefore, any one size fits all solution to digital equity is simply set up to fail within Asian American communities. And so when we talk about what digital equity actually looks like, and when we talk about what it looks like to truly serve our communities, for us that means going into our different community spaces and putting the steering wheel into the hands of community leaders who are already in those spaces. And after doing a host of listening sessions, as I mentioned before, with those community leaders, a few common themes came up as especially important when it comes to promoting digital equity for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders. And first is that our communities are protective. And secondly, trusted messengers are essential to promoting digital safety and equity. When I talk about our communities being protective, I talk about the fact that we have Vietnamese refugees who have fled from a country where government surveillance was a significant reason as to why they were being persecuted. We have Japanese Americans who have very recent memories of internment and databases being used against them and weaponized by the federal government. And we have Native Hawaiians who are still actively fighting off appropriation and exploitation of their cultural data. And so, and especially in this context, when trust in our government and trust in institutions is very low, the idea of adding an extra level of vulnerability, and that vulnerability being putting your information online, signing up for an email, accessing digital resources, that willingness to engage in that is far more, causes a lot more anxiety than I think one would initially anticipate. And so I think practitioners, especially the practitioners who are actually doing and hosting these digital literacy courses, are sort of facing a double bind. Either you tell people about the risks that they adopt when they go online, especially absent any federal privacy regulations, and they become scared and they don't pick up the phone when you try to call them with resources, or you don't tell them and then they go on and it's the wild, wild west online. And so that brings us to, in the spirit of being solutions oriented, the need for trusted messengers. For us, we've come to find that in language, culturally competent, trusted messengers who are actually doing the work of lifting up the hood and explaining to people and explaining to our elders, our seniors, our limited English proficient community members what's actually happening when they go online. What do cookies mean? What is happening when you actually talk to ChatGPT, and where is that data going? And doing the work of explaining it to them is fundamental to making sure that people are able to be safe online. I think anyone who has ever tried to help their immigrant parent use Gmail knows that it's a lot easier to say just because than actually explaining it to them. But I think that our community members are also worthy and deserving of the dignity of explaining it to them and explaining it to them in non-technical, understandable ways. Because for us, digital equity does not happen without digital safety, and digital safety does not happen without trusted messengers. And we gotta keep doing that. We got a report coming out next week, actually, on the specific issue. If you want to look more into it, it's called "From Translations to Chatbots: AANHPI Perspectives on Impacts and Governance of AI." So yeah.
Thank you, Angel. Davida, Peter, or Monica, do you want to share anything about barriers in your specific communities, any solutions that you have deployed, what worked?
Yeah, I think one thing to highlight that you said is to be able to reach digital equity, we have to have digital training that makes sense. Time is important, either because if you're gonna take a digital training that takes 6 hours out of your day in a community, in any of our communities, that means that you're not with your children. That means that you have to have childcare. That means that you have, instead of cooking a meal for your children or working, you're taking the time to learn something new. So whatever we do build for them, it has to be something that is meaningful. So for example, the National Urban League, we have a curriculum on digital training that is actually trained by NDI, the navigators. So they're digital navigators, and teaches them how to find the best Wi-Fi best connectivity, things that they're going to be using that is actually going to be saving them money. So that becomes a hurdle because there's so much information out there that I think for low-income African American, Latino, or any type of immigrant, they're bombarded by information. And the truth is that if your number one goal is to feed your kids, all of the other information kind of becomes noise. So I think is having a real clear message on why they need it and developing digital trainings that make sense for them. Because equity is not only about having access. We can all have the best Wi-Fi, but people don't know how to use it to be part of society or to use it to make money, then it's just one more thing. And even if you give them free laptops, we had a variety of our affiliates. We got donations to give out free laptops, but we're still seeing people not being able to use it the right way. So we did create other modules and other trainings to help them understand not only how to use a laptop, but how much more they can use in the basic email transactions.
Peter or Davida, do you want to add anything about barriers and solutions?
Sure. Just in response to both of what comments of like our communities are protective of each other, which I definitely feel in any country, and the need for trusted messengers, but also for training that makes sense. What came to mind is our digital navigator in Hoopa Valley Tribe, who was with their community for like 2 years, and it wasn't until like the end of the 2 years that and he'd been thinking about this for a while, but in terms of using his funding, he's like, so we have a problem in our community is that we have a lot of business people and entrepreneurs and things like that, and yet none of them have a device and none of them know how to use a POS system. And he was like, so this just makes sense. Just like exactly what you said. It's just like, it makes sense. And I want to do it because I'm a business owner and he's actually a pit master, which is really cool. And so he took the time and he took his Saturday and he did this training. And I think they started about like 10 businesses online after this training. It was really incredible because Hoopa Valley Tribe is really tiny. And that's probably maybe, 5% of the tribe. That's probably our business owners. And now that's, come up to 25%. I don't know the stats specifically, but it's just kind of created this like spark in the community of like, this is possible now because we have someone here who's acquiring the devices, acquiring the skills, and is sharing it with us, and they're from the community too. So,
Peter, you want to add anything before I move to the next question?
Sure, yeah, just to go back to the question of trust. I think Angel, you really described it very well and eloquently that especially non-English language speakers are susceptible to fraud, and it's hard. We feel like we're always on our back feet trying to prevent and get the word out about preventing fraud, and it really erodes the trust to adopt technologies. And so it's one of those struggles, and AI is only accelerating that. So it's something that we need to all focus on.
Perfect setup for my next question. Monica, so we talk a lot about AI nowadays and how we are integrating it into other digital skills trainings. So what are your thoughts on how organizations can design digital and AI focused training programs that effectively prepare workers for rapidly evolving roles while also addressing issues of accessibility, equity, and upskilling across diverse workforces?
Yeah, so like I said before, the National Urban League has created a variety of module trainings, and AI training is part of our digital training under the upskilling and reskilling programs. For the longest time, digital training became the basics, but to realize that there is a lot of middle career participants who are either losing their jobs and need to get credential or non-credential certifications to help them be part of the jobs of the future. So we've actually incorporated a lot of artificial intelligence trainings, and not only by understanding how it works, ChatGPT, Gemini, Cloud, how to build agents to make your job more efficient, but also how is that going to be changing your job? So if you're already employed, by getting that type of non-degree certification, and usually it's like a 16-hour training, depending on what they choose, that can actually be the difference between them getting promoted. Or getting a job at another organization. So now we are thinking of digital skilling as something that is preparing people who are currently employed, but actually allowing them to grow in the new technology jobs kind of setting that we have. And I think a lot of people use artificial intelligence now. It's kind of like the hot trend that we have. But again, at the National Urban League, what we think is let's build trainings that make sense, and that it's either by a LinkedIn badge or something that they can actually take to our employer and say, I am trained in AI. I think it was Brookings who had a paper come out, and people who have non-degree certifications do get employed faster whenever you're switching jobs, careers. So it is important that our participants, and in my case, the African American community, it is prepared to compete in the new economy.
Okay. Does anyone else want to add to that? What is AI? How does AI look like that AI skilling look in your communities, especially when you're like developing a workforce for the future?
Hispanic Federation we have a partnership with Google.org to implement the AI Essentials training. And it's been quite successful because it's 10 hours and it's extremely practical. There's no sort of prerequisites. I took the course myself and it gave me a lot of insight on just the basics of prompt engineering, understanding misinformation. So I think and I liked what you said because I think this follows up with that, and it's a practical skill, and it's also realistic too when we're talking about, you brought up earlier about, trainings that are 6 hours a day. It's like, well, that's great, but does that make sense? And this is just 10 hours simple, and it could get people to understand, right? When you're doing a phone search, when you're, on Google, right? What is AI and has that detection?
One thing I do, oh, yeah, okay. One thing I do also want to point out, and I think it's an emerging sort of trend that maybe this is me sort of looking into the future crystal ball, and maybe it's based on stats, I don't know. But in a lot of the conversations that we're having with community members, we're hearing them talk about using AI to write their resumes. Well, lo and behold, hiring managers are also using AI to review resumes. And lo and behold, managers are also using AI to determine their employees' scheduling, also to determine whether or not an employee gets a demerit for not making their quota for the end of the week. And in the positions that a lot of our limited English proficient immigrant professional development clients are participating in, they end up getting into jobs like freight work or in Amazon warehouses or as Uber drivers. And so this trend towards automation in the sort of managerial roles at workplaces, I think a lot of people will call it bossware is the new term for it. I think also raises some risks for our community members, especially when we know that these algorithms are biased. And at least within Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities, they're more likely, for example, to flag a cover letter that is written by a limited English proficient writer as AI generated, even when it's written human generated. And so it's definitely something I think that we should be continuing to monitor as practitioners. What the solution is there, I don't necessarily know yet, but I think that it'll require community input and potentially labor organizing.
So all these themes that everyone is bringing up, it really resonates with me. I'm actually on the job search, so and navigating spaces where I definitely want to work with tribes and indigenous communities and things like that. I find it kind of surprising that the majority of the tribes I'm applying for are using AI and are filtering their resumes and their cover letters and things like that to point out keywords. And I know this because the one I used AI as a test and realized the only jobs I was getting interviews for were, based out of the AI, standards that I was following. So I was like, that is messed up because I feel like there should also be a human element or filter or person, human resources person who comes from an indigenous community who sees the inherent, value and cultural aspect that people like myself are putting into their resume and seeing that, identity of indigeneity or Navajo or, being a matriarch too in my community as well, that I incorporate it into my professional, just how I work. And so I also see too that a lot of the employers put at the bottom of their, applications, we do not use AI for, for the filtering. So I'm like, okay, I appreciate that. And I see that mainly within like nonprofits who serve in, indigenous communities and things of that sort. So I don't know, I have high hope, but also just as a person who's like who is experiencing this right now, just this week, I'm just it's really interesting of how it's working and maybe how human resources at the tribal level is either making them efficient or cutting out jobs to, other tribal members who might, benefit from being that human resources person who's intaking applications. So yes, I hope that adds to the conversation.
Thank you all. Peter, I'm going to pivot to you next. You said something interesting when we talked. You mentioned wanting to see Latinos as not only consumers, but creators of technology. I love this because I'm a huge advocate of inclusive design and the importance of having diverse voices in that process and workforce development. Can you share some insights on the connections to members of marginalized communities being respected and empowered as creators within the tech/digital inclusion workforce and how this impacts the American economy at large?
Yeah, thank you. And there's really a lot to respond to that there, but I think I'll start first with the sort of differentiating between consumers versus creators of technology, and then we could talk a little bit about what HF is doing to help creators in this space. But first, has anyone here seen the Barbie movie? Yes, right, right. When talking about consumerism, Jenna Ortega in that movie, a Latina, is viewed and portrayed as a consumer. And I think it's an example of just the many ways that it goes deep in how Latinos are viewed as a growing consumer base. Businesses are trying to market to Latinos, and it's not necessarily about bringing Latinos into the workforce or providing the access to digital equity. And there are these assumptions that are made, right? Rather than facts, right? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the facts and that according to census data, the main reason Latinos are disconnected is because of cost and access, not because of culture. And so it's really important to me that we dispel that myth that, in Latino communities, technology doesn't matter, right? It does matter. And these narratives make their way into boardrooms, into halls of Congress, into, all these different circles of power. And when determining, okay, are we going to build a server, or are we going to, build, if a business is going to expand into a new community that requires digital skills, are they going to shy away from a Latino community because of these assumptions? And so that's really what, we feel like we're up against when it comes to breaking that narrative. And so what Hispanic Federation has done to do this is in 2020, we established, as I mentioned, the Latino Digital Accelerator. This is a grant making and capacity building program for Latino-led and serving institutions. We developed at first an initial digital skilling curriculum that focused on the core competencies, the Microsoft suite, the Google suite, and that has evolved into helping folks, advancing careers, get IT certifications, cybersecurity, all these very fast-growing fields, and now artificial intelligence. Since that program has launched, we have served 30,000 individuals and helped 40,000 job seekers acquire employment. And I wanted to give a shout out to two particular programs that we have. The first example is a partnership that we have with Florecer Yuma. Their founder and CEO, Audrin, I think she's here today. Is she? Oh, there she is. Okay, great. I mentioned that AI Essentials program. It's 10 hours of AI training. She's actually having, I should mention that their mission is to mentor migrant, indigenous, and first-generation students in Yuma County, Arizona, and Imperial County, California. And she's provided those students, juniors and seniors, access to the AI Essentials course, and she's helping them write their college essays and really tell their stories, right? And it's not just a copy and paste from ChatGPT. It's learning to iterate. It's learning to, you are using your brain, right? You are really thinking through how to tell your story. And, if anyone remembers how stressful the college application process is, it's very difficult to navigate. And, helping first generation students learn that 10-hour AI Essentials program and then tell their stories is one example. And I'll give another shout out to Miami EdTech. They're another affiliate of ours that supports low-income Latinos in Miami. They established the first registered apprenticeship program for artificial intelligence. And so they're providing the upskilling for young adults to learn these different AI building skills, not just use skills, but being on the back end and creating AI products, and then giving them an entry-level employment opportunity within the AI field. And if you're aware, if you're in the workforce sector, you know that AI has been eliminating these opportunities. So we're really doing our best here to combat a lot of these different forces.
Okay. So I'm going to actually, any questions related to this topic, we're gonna wait. I'm gonna move to Davida. I'm keeping an eye on the time here. So no. It's my fault. I'm trying to manage the limited time we have together well. So, and then if you have questions in the audience that you have related to what Peter just said, just write it down and we'll get back to it. Okay. Davida, we've worked together for many years, and during that time, we've shared a lot of experiences. For example, what life is like in the Jemez Pueblo, and I've learned a lot from you, especially around barriers and bright spots in tribal communities. We're all hit by the loss of funding from the Digital Equity Act. Can you share more about what that loss looks like and feels like in Indigenous communities, and what it looks like for Indigenous people and what it looks like in tribal communities? How does that impact healthcare and workforce advancements that communities were working towards, and how does Tribal Broadband Boot Camp work to fill some of those gaps?
So during the whole process of both infrastructure and use and adoption funding opportunities at the federal level, there has been a message of building trust and coordination with tribal communities. So emphasizing tribal consultation, partnerships with states, and transparency in build out and creating programs. So there was an emphasis like states must, keep tribes in the loop and vice versa kind of thing, so that we're not double dipping and to ensure that you get funding. But that trust is on thin ice right now. So yes, tribes are actually eligible for digital equity funding. We just figured this, like last month. So they're eligible for a native entity set aside under DEA funding, but they're not calling it DEA funding, which is kind of funny. And not transparent as well. But this actually comes after 3 years and 2 previous rounds of applying for these exact same funds. So the first was a letter of interest where too many tribes applied for funding. Then, and so they said, too many tribes, so we're gonna release the tribes under the Native Entities Capacity Grant, which is under the state capacity grant. So it was a Native entity set aside, which was on the brink of being awarded. And actually, a couple people were actually given, award letters. But then that was canceled under the new administration change. So with that being said, there's now a new round of funding. This is the same funding, by the way, but with the confusing message of lumping BEAD, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program, and the Native entity set aside in the new call for transparent consultation for the upcoming round of funding. So yesterday, we actually, folks, Indigenous and tribal practitioners under here at Net Inclusion, we had a Birds of a Feather gathering, which is called Indigiclusion. And I was able to kind of gather feedback from that group. And I'm so lucky to be in this group and to be comfortable enough. Like I said, we're all like brothers and, my aunties tell me what to do in my job basically, because they're doing broadband build out. And so, they're my heroes. So yesterday during the Indigiclusion gathering, digital equity practitioners and colleagues were able to discuss this new round of funding and prep feedback to give back to NTIA because they're asking for it. We have until the 13th to do this. So there are many themes, and one being that they need to release the funds right now. In order to build trust, they need to release them right now. Tribes, they need to trust tribes as well, that they use the funds for what they need, that they are applying for. Because what happens is that they'll apply for funds for, TBCP and lay out these metrics that they find is what they want to be, what they've measured and what they want to be accounted for. And when reporting comes, they're asked to report on a completely different metric that they're not even paying attention to. So they have to go back and re-report and find, this information that NTIA wants. And that kind of, relays a level of distrust in terms of so you gave us this money, but we can't actually use it for what we need it for. So this also brought up the fact that also the right people need to be invited to this table to these consultation sessions and things like that. Meaning that they invite folks who are building out infrastructure, but that they leave out healthcare, they leave out workforce development, they leave out the folks who are managing these social programs and our digital equity practitioners who need to be at the table. So the messaging is confusing, to say the least. But with the help of advocates such as NDIA, Waskawiwin, and folks who work with the Tribal Broadband Bootcamp, we're hopeful to be more, helpful in terms of connecting them to the right folks. And those are folks that, are helping out, such as folks at Public Knowledge who have context on the Hill. And that's the other thing too, of course, if you're not on Washington, it's really hard to kind of get into the right room as well. And so we also want to rely on our Indigenous, folks who are on the Hill too, which is the National Congress of American Indians, and even maybe the National NTTA, which is National Tribal Telecommunications Association. And so relying on these, champions and these folks who are talking to not only tribal leaders, but also leaders on the Hill that can help make this process more seamless with less red tape, which after 3 years and 3 rounds of funding is hard to do. I'm sorry, I'm kind of a little downer, but this is a discussion we had yesterday, and it was just kind of hearing from folks who are, when are we going to get these funds? So hopefully that's what the boot camp does is, to be advocates in that space and to, take advantage of the connections they have in these different national spaces to kind of help folks who are doing the work in, small town reservations to actually share their story and get connected to the right people and make these programs better.
Thank you, Davida. Okay, I do want to get to audience questions.
I see a common theme among all the panelists here, which is they're saying, like Peter said, he did for 40,000, he gave 40,000 number, and the lady on the right, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name, but you talked about the metrics being messed up. And Angela, she talked about how the Asian American, they're being left out. So it looks like a catch-up game to me. This looks to me like there's never going to be where you're going to achieve, even though when you're saying you did 40,000, your tone says we are not there. That's what I heard. We're still not there. So my blank questions, and then the civil rights has been long time, and Chicago, which being a progressive city, is still segregated. So my question is does do we need a tacit approval from the other side for the people that we care, the marginalized society, to prosper and be at peace? So is there an approval or a consent we need from the other side, whoever the other side is that we are fighting, in order for peace and prosperity to be in the city? Thank you.
I could speak as it relates to really like this digital divide. And I thank you for your question, because it does, as someone who's been in this space, right? All the hard work that many of us, everybody here at NDIA puts in, and in the moment we're in, right? You feel like what, has it helped, right? Because we're seeing in many ways things go backwards. But as it relates to digital equity, the infrastructure law was a bipartisan law that Hispanic Federation, and I know many folks here advocated for and believed was a real solution. So I don't think, as it relates to creating a system of laws that allows folks to get access to affordable internet and the trainings, I feel like the solutions, they're out there, and there was support for that, and I don't see why it couldn't happen again in the future. And I think that's something that I'm sure has probably been a conversation in other panels here is, what do we do with the Digital Equity Act, and what do we do with BEAD now that it's been either canceled or disrupted significantly? But that is something that I think we can look to continue to bridge the divide.
I'm going to say I'm the eternal optimist by saying the fact that we have an opportunity here. The reason is that work is being redefined. It's kind of like when the Industrial Revolution happened. You could have been the best farmer, but that no longer matters because the new jobs change. So just like the Industrial Revolution happened and it changed the way workforce works, the technology revolution is here. Now, the problem is, are we as minorities are going to continue to say, oh, poor us, or are we going to use this as an advantage to make us come ahead of the curve? And this is where I see, broadband expansion. It's happening, right? A lot of the states have gotten the money to happen broadband expansion. We can choose as, for example, the National Urban League. We have intermediaries. We are an intermediary and we have affiliates that are in the cities. What we did is we identified what are the cities that are getting the funding, what are the projects that are happening that are funded, that money has been released, some money has been released, some money hasn't, and identified what are the jobs that are going to be available through the broadband expansion. So let's not wait for people to tell us, hey, these are the job placements. No, let's us be the ones to drive and say, hey, California is building 10,000 electrical buses. Who is training the new drivers? Who is training the new people to do mechanics on those buses? Because you know what? The old mechanics no longer are needed, right? And then going to them and saying, we have the workforce, we have the people. The Los Angeles Urban League has 50 people who are willing to get and learn this new trade, right? Chicago, the Chicago Urban League here. They're one of our stellar urban leagues, and they have a tech academy, and they have a training set now, and they can train you on AV, fiber installers, electricians, line workers, network engineers. These are trainings that are happening here locally. And the way we identify those trainings is by identifying, okay, broadband expansion is happening. Yes. What are the construction jobs? So to be able to build that, you need some jobs. Where do we place our participants? Latinos, Asian, African Americans, right? And two, how do we train to sustain the broadband expansion, right? So those jobs are going to be more technical, right? Operational jobs, network administrators, IT support specialists, cybersecurity professionals, data center technicians. Those are software engineers. Those are more professional certifications needed. What we did on that is, for example, our Houston Urban League, they partnered with the Houston University, and they identified, okay, if you have any African American kids who are graduating in your IT school academy or university, but they need money to be able to pass the IT exam, right? So for example, CompTIA, they have A+ and fundamentals course. They take the class, they can pay for the class, but they might not be able to have the money to sit down and take the test. And if they fail, they have to take it again. And that's only like $145. But a lot of people in our communities don't have it. So identifying who are those people who might have the training, they just need the little push to make them go into the professional jobs. So I, as an optimist, I say this is a new revolution because everyone's learning. Everyone's learning. We can choose to be the ones who are left behind or not. And so as leaders in our communities is what are we doing to identify it? What services are we giving them? And that makes sense and moves them forward.
And I'm just going to add before we move to the next question, and this is a reminder, but no one, I'm the moderator, but it's the one answer I'm going to provide. We don't need permission to call out injustices in our community. I'm going to give a few examples. So we have, we honored Bill Callahan this morning with the Digital Equity Champion Award. Bill Callahan wrote a report on digital redlining in Cleveland, called out a provider in that report. If you want to read the report, go to NDIA's website, put it in the search, it'll come up. And it's just an example of how when we see things that are happening wrong in our communities, we can take action, or as Angela said, we can do, right? So we do have agency, and in fact change comes from the community level up, so it comes from the ground up. So I would just remind everyone of that little friendly reminder. We do have some power, not a lot all the time, but we have some power in the community, at the community level as well, to call out change.
Good afternoon, everyone. Walter Tucker, the 4th Los Angeles County, Delete the Divide. I really appreciate the remarks around digital equity as it relates to meeting individuals and households at their point of need, especially with cultural considerations. I am curious about small business support. So at some point, POS was mentioned on the panel today, and I'm wondering if any of you do this similar work for small businesses, particularly those that are situated within underserved communities.
So the National Urban League, we do have an entrepreneurship center. We have a variety of them, and they're funded by different private organizations. So we do offer that, and you can go on our website and see what are the cities that are funded under that grant.
I'm going to blow up my coworker's spot here. Lina, raise your hand. Lina leads our small business work, and among other things. But yeah, we've done a few programs in Connecticut and New York where we've really seen great impact with the need for improving digital skills in small businesses. But I can't speak fully to it, but I recommend you to connect.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lorna Battles, and I am from the state of Virginia with social services. My question revolves around language access. So, as we know, it's that dual digital divide. It's the not having the device and obviously not having the language skills as we continue our fight for English-only platforms. My question is, what is a one non-negotiable step that every organization must take to ensure their digital resources are accessible to limited English proficient individuals or even those who are non-English speakers?
One thing for Hispanic Federation is I guess the theme of what folks were talking about is that trusted messenger, and actually the organizations that Hispanic Federations support speak that language both literally and figuratively. So I think it is vitally important. Our trainers, are fluent in Spanish, and our digital navigators speak Spanish. So I think for us, if our centers are in those communities, it's just a non-negotiable. They must be fluent in Spanish.
Yeah, I'll say something else that we're coming to identify is that with our organizations that are using AI and also implementing digital literacy courses within their organizations and communities, is that we're seeing common use cases come up, and common, for example, words that need translations. Like, how do you translate mouse in Vietnamese? Any organization that is serving Vietnamese people is going to need that translation too. And so what we're working on is pooling those resources together in these different languages, so that when we're telling our community organizers to put on these digital literacy classes, they have some basis of a foundation to do that work too. We're also working on doing something like, we're working on a best practices for AI for translations toolkit as well, so that any translations that are done for lower resource languages that may have inaccuracies, when you use AI to translate rather than a real person, has proper SOPs that go along with it. And I think this follows along with our theme of, if we're going to be using these technologies, we need to use them responsibly and make sure that the application and benefits reach all, not just those who are speaking the most resource languages.
Okay. Janelle, thank you. Oh, okay. We have one more question in the back, and then we're going to move on to closing thoughts. Sorry.
So this question is kind of counterintuitive given where we are, but I'm part of an organization that supports people coming home after incarceration. And we're slowly becoming a tech company because we recognize the profound and efficient way that that helps people in that situation. Many of our clients, some of who have done 5, 10, 15, 20 years or more, are very much still in the analog world. And so I'm just curious if any of the panelists have encountered that, and how are you making sure you bridge the gap between when they're actually not ready for accessing technology and when they fully are?
So at the National Urban League, we do have a reentry workforce program, and we do a lot of work what we call behind the wall. So it starts before they're actually getting released. I don't know much about it because I don't run that program, but I know the person that runs the program. And one of the things he says a lot is, if you do good training behind the wall, after they're released, that person will have a higher chance to not go back to jail. And that is one of the biggest issue with participants who are released, is that between 1 or 3 years, they will go back to jail because they don't know what to do. So there is a lot of programming happening behind the wall, just basic skills that will prepare them to some basic jobs. Of course, they will not be trained on cybersecurity, but there is still modules that you can give them to make them successful when they're released.
Davita's going to go, and then we're going to wrap up.
Okay. So I can't speak specifically to, because I don't work directly with formerly incarcerated, but I've seen this in our tribal communities in terms of like folks who are being rehabilitated in not only formerly incarcerated, but drug abuse, whatever it might be. And there's been a cultural aspect to it, is like, if you go to the tribe and incorporate yourself back into community and community values, anything is possible. And that I've seen that sort of value, or that sort of mission-driven sort of state, like aspect in how our tribal colleges are run and how the boot camp is run too. So these educational spaces are meant to like for everyone. And when we're talking about youth and tribal communities, that can span from not only from 15 to 18, which is, usually is like kind of youth programs are at, but actually youth in tribal communities is like, 15 to 30. because, there is like a formation of like, ups and downs, or, go to school, come back to school, go to work, or move into urban areas, come back to the reservation. So there's always kind of like this movement or this trend of movement of trying to find space when you're Indigenous, and that can mean many things. So I've seen educational programs who don't question if you are formerly incarcerated or anything, but just say, if you're interested in learning more about broadband networks, we're having this tribal broadband boot camp, and you can come learn more. If it's something that you want to pursue, then there's a tribal college that we want you to connect with, and you can get a certificate. Or there's a certification that is meant for tribal leaders or tribal members that is open. And so we've seen folks go from, just attending a boot camp as an attendee, who are now, running broadband networks for their tribe. And we don't find out until, a year later, like, by the way, before this, I was, um, unhoused, or, we do have one gentleman who did say, like, I was, formerly incarcerated, and now I'm a leader in my tribe because I know a lot about broadband networks. So it's really, I would say that we do have success stories, even though I don't work with the any group specifically, but it's really good to hear like the storytelling that's happening in Indigenous communities, and that it starts off with education and having certification or training available, without questioning background.
Thank you, Davida. Okay, we're going to wrap up, so just give us a few more minutes. I want to give each panelist 30 seconds to share final thoughts, so keep it succinct. Okay, who wants to start?
Well, just thank you for, I'm so glad for my former panelists, because I was writing down things and learned a lot from you all. And so I think I'm going to take a lot of these different aspects and, incorporate it into the work that we do in Indigenous communities for sure. And also that a lot of this work I learned from the people in the room. So from my friends at Jemez, friends at Hoopa Valley, there's a lot of things that on the ground professionals and people who are doing the work and talking to people in the community that I'm stealing from, and like learning a lot about and sharing on a national platform. So listen to your communities, and I think you're going to gather a lot from them.
Yeah, I'll just say again, also, I'm really appreciative for being here with my fellow panelists. I think that we're in a scary and somewhat unsettling time where there's a lot of change, whether it be in the job market or in our federal administration. But I also do think that this sense of powerlessness, especially when it comes to the digital world, happens when we aren't sure of what's going on. But when we actually lift the hood, things are a lot easier than they try to make it seem. And I think a lot of power comes from that, and our communities deserve to have that power.
Agree entirely. I think if I could leave with any last remark, it would be that we have the proven solutions, and you've heard from panelists today, and I'm sure you've heard throughout net inclusion, right? That the solutions are there. The problems are that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We do not need to, right, as Angel is sort of suggesting, right, come up with some crazy solution, right? We know what works. We know that interventions from corporations and government into communities and that's money, by the way. So, right, giving money to organizations who speak the languages, who understand the communities as trusted messengers can really solve this problem. So I would just say, right, like going into the future, we need to, make sure that we keep that up.
100%. I think if we want AI and digital innovation to be truly successful, we have to act with intention. That means investing not just in technology, but in people, not just in infrastructure, but in access, skills, and trusted individuals. When government, industry, and community move together, digital inclusion becomes economic opportunity. So let's see it as something to be optimistic. We all now can help our communities thrive in the future work.
Okay, thank you all. To the panelists, thank you for sharing your wisdom with all of us. To the audience, thank you all for hanging out here with us, joining in this session this afternoon. Please take some time and use the QR code or the link in Whova to evaluate the session. That means a lot to us. And then please feel free to reach out to myself or any of the panelists up here to keep the conversation going. I heard one of the panelists mention she's in the job market. And so just gonna throw that out there for all of y'all. Okay, thank you for being here with us today.